All right, let's get started, shall we? So, welcome HTSC alumni, students, and friends, or anyone who's joining us to today's event. I'm Emily Williams, Director of Alumni Engagement and Lifelong Career Development. We're delighted to have you join us for today's event, Exploring Science Through Food, Brown Butter Popcorn. I saw some mention of Rice Krispie treats, so I'm very excited for today's session. Before we get started, as always, I do have some light housekeeping items. So as you can see today, we are in a meeting format for our session. You are welcome to keep your camera on or turn it off, whatever your preference. We will be recording today's session and sending it to all who have registered. You'll notice you're currently muted, and we do ask that you remain muted throughout the presentation. We'd love to get a sense of who's here today, so feel free to put in the chat your HTSC degree, your program or concentration, especially where you're joining us from, your geography. We'd love to see that. And your current role. Kate and Hallie will have a facilitated Q&A after their presentation, so keep that in mind as questions are bubbling up, that scientific mindset. And lastly, we have closed captioning available for today's session, so if you would like to see the captions, click on the CC/live transcript button, then click on Show Subtitle. You can turn off subtitles by clicking on Live Transcript and then clicking Hide Subtitle. So now I will introduce today's speakers who come to us from Bite-Sized Education, designing multimedia curricula and resources to engage K-12 students in science and encourage curiosity, exploration, and a positive disposition towards science through food and cooking. Both alums, Kate Strangfeld, Ed.M. 2022, is founder, producer, and learning designer at Bite-Sized Education. She taught middle school science and high school chemistry for 8 years in Washington, D.C. at a public charter school and international IB school. Her master's was in our Learning Design, Innovation, and Technology program. And many years ago, she received a culinary degree specializing in health supportive foods and worked in various restaurants and as a private chef. So she knows her stuff. Hallie Rockwell, also Ed.M. 2022, swore she would stay away as far away from science as possible once she met her high school requirements, but her personal and professional life keeps gravitating towards anything and everything science. We're glad women in STEM. After 5 years of teaching English language arts, she returned to the classroom here, also in the LDIT program. And while her background is in English literature education, she loves creating immersive and creative learning opportunities across content areas focusing on learning. So we are so fortunate. Please join me in welcoming Kate and Hallie. Thank you both.
Thank you for the introduction. We are really excited to connect with all of you today and would love for you to just introduce yourself in the chat and let us know what brought you here today. If you're just like a general curious person, or if you are a science educator really looking to maybe implement resources in your classroom. Also, if you are cooking with us today, let us know in the poll just so we can try to accommodate everyone and give the best experience for everyone. That will be helpful for us in terms of just planning and timing for the presentation. So before we dive into the activity today, we want to give some background information for what we do, why we do it, and a little bit more about our story and who we are, and really think about the big picture behind the activity today. So we believe that if K-12 educators are both empowered and inspired to teach science through food, then that experience for students will be more engaging, accessible, and equitable so that more students have a positive disposition towards science, connected to their everyday life, and are inspired to be curious. Now, that's the theory. In practice, what we do is we create resources to teach STEM through food and cooking for 6th through 12th grade classrooms and after-school programs. For right now, we're focusing on 6th through 12. We do have plans to expand to younger age groups, but that's kind of our area of expertise right now. Now, food in particular is in such a unique position to be used to teach science because it's accessible, it's relevant, and it's popular. It provides unique opportunities to bridge a gap between formal and informal education. Students can take what they've learned in the classroom and potentially continue that experimentation at home or with their community with accessible ingredients. And it also allows students to bring in their own voice and culture into the science classroom, which, as someone who's taught science for a long time, it can be really tricky to find an authentic and unforced way to do that. Additionally, it also just draws on existing popularity. Just take a look at Netflix and see the number of cooking shows. And there are actually more shows that are kind of coming out now that are looking at the science behind cooking on Netflix. So there's just a lot of popularity and interest in this field. And then lastly, understanding cooking at food at its core embodies best practices in science education, which we'll talk a little bit more about what exactly those best practices are, specifically sense making, in a little bit. Now, one of the biggest questions I often get is, what is teaching STEM through food? What does it actually look like? So we want to show you a 1-minute video that we think helps illustrate and answer that question. All right, so a little bit about who we are and our story. Bite-sized education is really kind of my accumulation of my journey with both education and food. As Lisa mentioned, I taught middle school science and high school chemistry in DC for 8 years. And particularly during the pandemic, when students were at home, I turned to my own passion and love for food as a way to continue students being able to engage in science in a really hands-on way that still felt really fun and meaningful and had that joy factor. And then, so after teaching for 8 years, I came to Harvard. And in addition to connecting with people in the LDIT program and at the education school, I also connected with 2 professors who teach a science and cooking undergrad course at Harvard, Pia Sorensen and Dave Weitz, who are at the Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Science. So last year, I kind of had this idea of wanting to include food in science education, but I wasn't fully sure exactly what that looked like for me, how I could do that on a larger scale. And so last year was really about thinking about what does that look like? And then over the summer, establishing a proof of concept. So over the summer, through funding through the Hugsy Educational Entrepreneurial Fellowship Program, as well as funding through Harvard Seas, I was able to establish a proof of concept and bring on people like Hallie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hallie Rockwell. I graduated with Kate in the inaugural LDIT Learning Design Innovation and Technology program in May of last year now. And before coming to Hugsy, I was an English major in college, minored in secondary education, graduated with a teaching license and taught for 5 years, specifically focusing on English, teaching language arts and writing to struggling readers and finding innovative ways to engage and transform young humans. And then at Harvard, I really was interested in what this whole learning design idea was, and fell in love with the idea of combining academic theories and meeting the practical needs of teachers and students in a K-12 space. So when Kate asked me to join, I was so thrilled to be able to apply my knowledge and skill, newly acquired knowledge and skill, and figure things out along the way. It's been a joy. So a lot of the things that I work on have to do with like the project management element, the learning design element, and a lot of that time and attention is focused on the resources, which I'm going to briefly talk to you about today. I know that's not the meat of today, but I do think it's helpful to see what we have. So our resources try to be as engaging and easily implemented as possible. So we have elements of listening, watching, reading, and doing. In a number of our resources, all of our resources, we have videos, frequently more than one. We are starting to add in some, we're calling them video podcasts. They're not on podcast feeds. They're in our YouTube page, but they're mostly audio focused. And then several of, many now of our videos also have articles that have been written and fact-checked by a team of consultants, and Kate and I. And then every one of our videos comes with a lab. So we take the idea of a traditional recipe and we add in an element of experimentation and critical thinking. We try to include experts that have different perspectives and funds of knowledge in order to introduce the students to a broad variety of foods and try to get out of particularly our American context in a way that is authentic and providing experts in particular who specialize and have experience in the country that the food is from. And then we are really trying to write our curriculum to be both easily implemented by the teachers, as I said, and then also empowering student-led exploration. So there's a degree of agency and autonomy for both teacher and student. So I've already talked briefly about these, but to overview, our lesson plan is aligned to NGSS standards with clear objectives, essential questions, and we try to include a list of recommendations of where you could incorporate these lessons into your broader scope and sequence. We also have day-by-day breakdowns of how we would divide up the time if there was a 45 to 50-minute class. And we also include lists of all the supplemental materials, which include worksheets, labs, and teacher slides. So these slides are for classroom use. As you can see on the right-hand side here, they're an overview and supportive visuals that a teacher may use in their classroom. And the slides are fully editable for every teacher so that they can customize it and make it their own to best meet the needs of their classroom. And we have our video, which you'll see a preview of in a little bit. We really want it to be an introduction to key concepts and a way to also go deeper into some more complicated science concepts in a way that's accessible to students, and try to model growth mindset through failure and trying to find solutions to the problems and have visuals that are engaging and clear without being too cluttered like some kids media can be. Our anchor readings are something we're really proud of. They are transformed, we think, really leveled up our work to be distinct from other curriculum that's out there. We have a summary of of history and the science of food, and this is where we'll go into the key science concepts in great depth with graphics that have been drawn by Kate and Felicia Ho, who is one of our consultants, and they do a really great job. We also try to summarize peer-reviewed science research in a way that students can understand, and we have a really rigorous list of resources in the back so that if students and teachers are curious, they can go to those original citations. And we also want it to be a place that teachers and students can then go and learn more. This should not be all encompassing facts, for example, about fermentation, like you see in the kimchi on the screen. It should be a place that inspires curiosity. And then we have the labs. So like I said, it takes the idea of a recipe and a lab and smushes them together. And at the end, there are ideas for further experimentation and lots of opportunities for critical thinking throughout. We also, this is kind of tucked back in here, but we have lab videos that walk through the more complicated labs without anything extra. So we are not including the science explanations in these. They're for those visual learners that need to see what's going on. And then we have our student activities, which have answer keys or questions aligned with the video and the anchor readings to push students thinking deeper. And then, like I said, we have audio. So we are really covering our bases here, trying to be as multimodal and accessible for all students and teachers to provide deeper understanding of science and joy of cooking. And here is a brief overview of all of the lessons that we have, and we have more coming out. I know there's at least one or two that we, that are not even on the screen that will be coming out in the next few weeks. So we have been very busy since June of 2022.
So in particular, today, what we're going to focus on is this idea of sense making, which NSTA defines. Do you mind clicking, Hallie, for the definition? So NSTA, the National Science Teachers Association, defines sense making as this idea of when students as scientists have authentic, relevant opportunities to actively make sense of the world. And by doing that, science learning becomes engaging, accessible, and important to all students. So in particular, the way that sense making works is you experience a phenomenon. So for us, that's some sort of cooking experience with food. It could be a taste test. It could be actively watching something being cooked. It could be cooking yourself. You're experiencing the phenomenon. And then you're using your senses and observations to explain how and why. And thinking about, why did that transformation occur? What was going on? And in particular, sense making also involves a community aspect, so sharing and building on each other's ideas. And I think what's really cool about sense making, and I always loved as a teacher, is that every class or group experience is truly unique because the students are having different perspectives, building off of each other, and everyone has different background and knowledge when it comes to these experiences. And then lastly is understanding through science concepts. And we really pride ourselves in thinking about how this looks in different contexts and learning settings with different student ages. So whether it's a IB biology class that's really going to dive into kimchi and measure carbonation through a probe, or if it's like an after school program for 6th through 8th grade students, and it's much more about just visually seeing things, there is an access point for everyone. And I think that's the beauty of what we're doing. So today we're going to focus on brown butter popcorn and the idea of sense making, and specifically think about how cooking transforms these foods. So how do we get from a stick of butter to brown butter? And how do we get from corn kernels to popped popcorn? I just want to, can you go to the next slide, Hallie? I'm fairly certain, but I would just like to double check because we will change things. If you are cooking today, do you mind just either raising your hand, putting it in the chat, directly messaging me or Hallie? It looks like, I'm not surprised, it's like the middle of the day that I think people are just watching, but I just want to double check because we'll change kind of our flow a little bit depending on that. This gives people a moment to discuss that or to reply. All right, I think what we do then is we just play the videos, Hallie, instead of having that hands-on experience for everyone since someone's cooking. Would you like me to play the videos, or how would you like to do that? Okay.
Yeah, if you could. Since it wasn't working earlier today.
Yeah. Okay. So what I have here, and this is on our YouTube channel, which we'll talk a little bit more about later if you want to support us. But we'll be looking at just literally butter melting. It's in real time. And we want to give you an opportunity to watch it. So it's 4 minutes long. I'm going to put into the chat what, in particular, the thinking routine that we're working on here, which is Observe, Think, Wonder, which is a play off of Harvard Project Series See, Think, Wonder. But the beauty of cooking is that it's not just about what you're seeing. You can also think about smell and sound. Obviously, smell is a little harder through a video, but definitely sound is still something that you could think about, or you can maybe even think about texture a little bit as well. So let me just share my screen. Are you able to see that, Hallie? Okay.
Yes.
As a teacher, some things I would immediately point out or question if I was doing this in the classroom is, why is the butter moving? We noticed it moved. What do we see? Physical changes? Do we see chemical changes? If I was doing this for a 9th grade chemistry class, that would be my immediate first question. Thinking about what's causing those changes. I also might point to seeing, it looks like there's different points in the pan where we see different things going on. What might be causing that, or why do we see that? The bubbles look different in certain places. The question why I thought it was necessary to move the pan. Another question you could ask is thinking about the sounds that you're hearing. Why is it no longer bubbling? What might that indicate? Thinking about what's actually in butter. What do you think is bubbling, or what is the source of those bubbles? I think there are a lot of different ways in which an educator could use this video, or I think it's a lot more empowering if you're actually doing as a student, you're just like literally watching it, because then you also get the smells, and at this moment, there's like this nutty smell. And so you're taking this seemingly simple process. I think most people think about melted butter and it might not necessarily think about that it's actually, there's so many complexities going on there. But I think you can really dive deep and think about all of the pieces that just occurred. So we're going to share a video that we use that actually looks at brown butter Rice Krispies. It's kind of a similar idea to the brown butter popcorn, a little bit of a twist, and show how we also explain what's going on. And I would say that this is for, I would put it between a 7th through 9th grade kind of level of understanding of really thinking about chemical and physical changes. And I'll explain a little bit about the reasoning behind that after just playing this short clip of the video. To explore the science behind this, we're going to focus in on the physical and chemical changes, specifically with the butter. As we add heat to the butter, we first notice physical changes, and in fact, 2 phase changes. First, the butter changes state from solid to liquid as it melts, and then we also see a phase change as we see all those bubbles. The water in the butter begins to boil off as we reach water's boiling point, which is 100 degrees Celsius. Might seem weird that there's water in your butter, but actually most butters are made up of about 15% water. The exact amount depends on the butter type. As we continue to add heat to the butter above 100 degrees Celsius, we start to see chemical changes occur. We see a change in color, and we notice differences in aromas and smell. 2 big indicators of a chemical reaction. The chemical reaction that's occurring right here at 120 degrees Celsius, to be exact, is one that pops up everywhere in cooking. Basically, anytime a food browns due to roasting, sauteing, baking, it's happening. And it's called the Maillard reaction. We personally think brown butter is the best way to showcase this reaction because we can use all of our senses to see how this chemical reaction changes substances and creates flavor. Just look at the difference between brown butter and melted butter. In addition to heat, we need sugars and proteins in order for this reaction to occur. And these are found in lots of things, from bread to meat to vegetables. In butter, we find those sugars in the proteins and milk solids, which only make up about 1 to 2% of the butter, but it's enough to make a difference and for the chemical reaction to occur. Even though the Maillard reaction is one of the most common reactions in cooking, we still haven't actually uncovered everything there is to know about it. And that's because it's really complex. And it's not just one reaction, but a chain of multiple reactions. We start by breaking down the sugars and proteins into their smaller parts, their building blocks, glucose for sugar and amino acids for proteins. And once we reach 120 degrees Celsius, these molecules go through a chain of multiple chemical reactions where bonds are broken, atoms mix and mingle, and new molecules with new combinations and shapes are created. And eventually in that complex reaction, we get flavor. No, seriously, the products are flavor molecules. So what's a flavor molecule? Let's take a look. These are just a small sample of simplified flavor molecules because guess what? There are thousands of flavor molecules that exist, and the coolest part is that we haven't even yet discovered them all. So instead of getting overwhelmed, let's look at the array of molecules and just see what atoms are popping up again and again. It's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And that's due to the law of conservation of matter. What goes in must come out. Okay, that's not exactly how the science textbook will state it, but that's the gist. So if we go back to our proteins and sugars, what we started with in the chemical reaction and look at their molecular structure and what atoms are in those, we're going to see the same exact atoms. Hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen, although nitrogen is only found in amino acids and not glucose. One of the ways we tinkered and explored with the brown butter itself was trying out different pans to see if different materials and surface areas affected how the butter browned, and it definitely did. We found that stainless steel pan worked best and was most consistent for us. You can also play around with the level of heat you're using to melt the butter, try different methods, like we've actually done it in the microwave, and surprisingly, it did work, and play around with the amount of time you're using to melt the butter and brown it. You can also try out different types of butter. European butters tend to have more fat and less water than American or AA butters, or you can even try out vegan butter, which is what we did. And as you can probably guess, the vegan butter did brown, but in a really different way because it doesn't have those same milk solids, those sugars and proteins unique to milk, and those are key to browning butter. You can see here the texture is totally different. For the Rice Krispie treats them. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there. So just to talk a little bit about the intention behind the video. So if you look up Maillard reaction, you're going to get a whole lot of Google hits. A lot of it is actually quite complex. And so for us, it's really thinking about like, what is the key piece there? Is it and providing a couple different ways in which teachers could use it, teaching traditional concepts that you would see in like a intro to chemistry class. So chemical and physical changes, that's a huge one. And then also thinking about law of conservation of matter. And I mean, you could even go into decomposition reactions and breaking down of different compounds. And I think one of the big pieces we always are trying to think about when designing these materials is how do you make them accessible and still give some opportunities for further exploration while not making it overwhelming. So like, for example, the flavor molecules, again, it's something where if you Google it, there are just so many. And so it's really thinking about like, well, how can we still allow students to understand briefly what a flavor molecule is, but at a level that works for them. The other food that we're going to look at today is popcorn. And this was something that I've done with my class multiple times, because I think it's one of those things, again, where it's like, we probably all have popped popcorn in a microwave or eaten popcorn and haven't really thought about like how amazing it is. And so I always like to show this video by Modernist Cuisine to really just kind of like allow students to take in the awe and beauty of this transformation. Again, super simple, but just thinking through what what is going on is actually really complex. Now we have another video that looks at stovetop popcorn, and I'm going to actually play this in a slightly different way just to show how I think our materials can be adapted by teachers. So I'm actually going to play this on double speed, just so you could see, I think you kind of get the same idea. And if you're a teacher where you're like, my students can't sit for 4 minutes and watch like what we just watched with butter, like they're going to lose focus. You could also play on double speed and I think get a pretty similar feeling. And so you can see here, I sped it up a bit just because the first bit takes a while for what you see here, which is steam on the lid. But I think you can quickly appreciate what's going on there. One of my favorite parts about doing stovetop popcorn is that even when you take off the lid here, you often get a couple more pops, which I think is also a really good opportunity to talk about why. So we're going to actually just briefly explain what's going on here. And we actually haven't fully made a popcorn video or lesson yet. So you guys are the first people that we're showing this to. But it's something I've done a lot in my classroom. And again, this is how I would frame it in like my 9th grade chemistry class. and have students think about maybe watching those videos or doing it themselves and trying to make sense of that phenomenon and building on each other's ideas. And then I would backload this essentially after talking to the students and thinking about like hearing their ideas and working off of them. So the first thing I would say is, what actually is popcorn? Popcorn is made up of starch and also water. Actually, 14% of a corn kernel is water. And as we add heat, we start to see changes. And specifically at 100 degrees Celsius, we have water's boiling point. And because of that, the water in the kernel is changing from a liquid to a gas or steam. And because of the way particles move in a gas, that means there's a lot more pressure inside the kernel. And eventually that pressure continues to build and build up to about 9 times the amount of atmospheric pressure around us, which is really crazy to think about that that's happening in your kitchen or like just on a stovetop, that you are building that much pressure. Now, additionally, there's continued heat. And so when we have that perfect mix of heat at around 180 degrees Celsius and pressure, the kernel hole bursts. And that releases gas. And that's when we hear that popping noise. And the popcorn actually turns inside out. Now, additionally, during this whole time, starch, which is in the corn, gelatinizes, which basically means it's absorbing water. It's actually a very similar principle to when we add cornstarch to sauces. It's absorbing the water, and that's what makes it thicker. Now, we could dive into the details and actually, like if I was doing this in a more rigorous way, or I wanted a measurable variable, we could measure the water loss by measuring the weight before and after for the popcorn. We could talk about law of conservation of matter in that by doing weight. We could explore all the different parts to the kernel and actually break it down or do a cross section of it. We could look at different types of corn and learn about their cultural relevance. Like there's so many different places that you could continue to explore. And while we haven't fully fleshed this one out, generally that's our job, is thinking about like, what do teachers need in order to be able to further explore this in a way that's meaningful and interesting to them and to students. I think teachers have to be excited about what they're teaching. But I think also based off of a lot of the conversations I've had, and also knowing this as a teacher myself, teachers are limited on time. And so the biggest question for us, and hopefully the value that we provide, is allowing teachers to be excited and inspired about something, but also saying, oh, I don't have to spend like 3 weeks thinking about what this looks like in the classroom. I have resources I can use and adapt and hopefully take a lot less time and still be able to have that impact in the classroom. So that's it for our presentation. Feel free to use the Poll Everywhere link, or just feel free to unmute yourself, ask questions, type in the chat. We would love to connect with you, answer questions, and yeah, thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Mahalo, that was great. Thanks so much. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. I think Lisa sent me a question that someone sent beforehand, which was about what does this look like in Zoom? And as of right now, we're not doing anything through Zoom in particular. I've done it in the past with cooking classes, and just based off of kind of our user testing with both teachers and students, I think there was not as much interest in doing something specifically on Zoom. And so hopefully the way that we've designed our materials is we still give people different ways to engage and use social media or other, like we have a Slack channel where we have some of my former students who are now high schoolers and are really interested in this. And it's kind of cool to see, like, they weren't necessarily interested in doing it in a Zoom altogether, but if we give them the videos and the recipes, like they're interested, they want to do it. And then they'll often just share on Slack, like, oh, this is what I noticed, or this is what I like, this is how I adapted it, or I tried this flavor out. So I think right now we're just exploring other ways in which students can engage and use digital platforms, but not necessarily through soon. And speaking of engagement, Hallie, you want to talk about this last slide?
Yes. So we would love to connect with you. There are lots of wonderful ways you can follow us on YouTube or Instagram. If you're on Teachers Pay Teachers, we have our products there as well. And if you want to stay up to date on what we're doing, you can also subscribe to our newsletter, which is at the very bottom of the page of our website. All those links are there. Of course, they did not hyperlink themselves, but they're there. And then we did want to also provide all the attendees with the brown butter lesson plan and materials, as well as a link to these slides, which I already put in the chat, and I will put in the chat again. And then if you have any other questions or want to connect with us, feel free to send us an email at bite-sized, sized is spelled differently, SCIZED, at bitesizeeducation@gmail.com. Thank you so much for spending 40 minutes with us today. We really appreciate you all. And thank you so much, alumni engagement team, for giving us the opportunity to come and chat about Bite Sized and share the love of science and cooking with you all.
Yes, thank you, Emily and Lisa. And I also just want to emphasize one thing. I couldn't tell in the chat if we have any teachers that are local to the Boston area, but we are offering, we're beginning to offer teacher professional development workshops starting in February. We're at like way beyond max capacity for February, which is really exciting for us. But also hopefully that means that we can do more sessions in the future. So we will, it's not publicly available, but yet, but we will be offering a virtual session on cheese making. I've been like going so into the world of cheese and looking at it with a lens of chemical reactions and intermolecular forces, primarily for 7th through 10th grade. So if that's of interest to you, please feel free to reach out or stay behind and talk about it. We will be offering one that's also virtual. So if you're not in the Boston area, we are also planning on offering a 3-hour virtual workshop where like we highly recommend you get in your kitchen, you're working in Zoom groups and really thinking about what this looks like and experimenting on your own. So thank you again.
Great. Oh, thanks, Kate. Thanks, Hallie. We so appreciate you for taking the time today to share this with us. And we will be sure to share out those resources that Hallie was sharing in the chat so that you all have easy access. I know I will be making those Rice Krispies with my kids. So thank you very much. And we hope you all have a good rest of your day, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.